Hi, I'm Tim Coombs of the Network of Biblical Storytellers seminar. And this story of Jesus and Nicodemus is the first story conversation that Jesus will have in the Gospel of John in this particular Lenten lectionary cycle. Now, as a worship planner, I know that these upcoming stories get longer and longer and longer, which to me is good enough reason to explore telling these stories as opposed to simply reading them. One of the first things that grabs our attention in the story is that Nicodemus comes to Jesus at night, which means he wants to avoid a crowd. Perhaps he just wants to have a private conversation with Jesus. Perhaps he's concerned about who will see him there. After all, in the Gospel of John, Jesus has just overturned the tables of the money changers. So he's a bit of a rebel. But I think to have Nicodemus slinking in to see Jesus is a little bit much. So remember, he's a respected Pharisee. He doesn't have to worry too much about his reputation. So don't overplay it. Now, a decision we have to make in this passage is about the word that follows born. The Greek word is anothen, and it means both again and from above, which meaning is derived from the context. Now, Jesus, I think, means from above, a spiritual rebirth, but Nicodemus hears again, a more physical, actual rebirthing. Unfortunately, we don't have a similar word in English, so the joke or the humor of the passage is lost on us. So what are we going to do about that? Well, some have suggested using the word anew, as born anew. I've heard using both terms, born again from above. But in my hearing, these words signal a spiritual rebirthing. And so I'm listening to that word from Nicodemus' point of view. What's going to make him think that this is an actual rebirthing process? Well, I think it's that word again. So when Jesus uses the word, I have him, you notice, saying, born again, but I gesture to heaven, as signaling a spiritual rebirthing. But Nicodemus can hear that physical rebirthing in the story. Again, you, the storyteller, need to make a decision about how you're going to translate this. Now, another word decision we have to make is around the word pneuma, which means spirit, breath, wind, okay? In particular, when Jesus says, you must be born of water, and now our English translations generally use the word spirit here. But I think the pairing and using the sense of wind works better. So you'll notice as I tell this part, I try to pair wind and spirit. I say, you must be born of water and the wind of the Spirit. And Jesus uses that analogy about the wind blows where it chooses. You hear the sound of it. Again, that's obviously wind. But at the end, again, you must be born of the wind of the Spirit. Again, helping us make the connection. Now, the tone of this passage should be lighter, certainly not heavy. Remember, this is a conversation between peers. Nicodemus has come out of his own personal curiosity. There really isn't much at stake here. So it shouldn't sound like I've often heard it read. If you want to see the kingdom of God, you must be born again. Or, are you a teacher of Israel and yet you do not understand these things? Again, if you're talking with a peer, it's a more imploring, almost a friendly tone to it. even though they're debating. If you want to see the kingdom of God, you must be born again. Or, are you a teacher of Israel and you do not understand these things? Remember, it's rabbi to rabbi. It should have sort of that light Yiddish playfulness about it. Are you a teacher of Israel and yet you do not understand these things? And the conversation should continue this way. While, of course, addressing the audience as a teller, you're Nicodemus and you're Jesus this way, with one exception, and that may be at the end of the passage, where I think John, the storyteller, begins to address his audience with those wonderful verses of John 3:16, 17. I think John would have taken a step towards the audience and said, because God so loved the world that God gave God's only Son. Okay? There's a slightly different sense about these words. So while you're still speaking of Jesus, you're addressing everybody in this passage. And so remember that this story is a conversation and not a theological treatise. Jesus is reaching out to Nicodemus, trying to get him to understand why he has come into the world. And that's what we're trying to do through our telling.